Good morning, everyone. It's morning in America. Good afternoon to those of you in the UK. It's Friday, and we are here for another session of Fridays Live with Findmypast. And it's a big one. It's a special one. So to all of you who have joined us before, say hello. Let us know where you're at, where you're from, what you're working on. For those of you who are new to the Findmypast community, welcome. We're very, very pleased to have you. We do this every week. Every Friday we have an episode, and today I get to be your host. So my name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the Research Specialist at Findmypast, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today on this very, very important week. But I am also going to tell you that this is a big one. This is a real big one. So we have Ellie in the comments. Please say hello to Ellie. She'll be helping manage all of us today, making sure that our stories are told and that we communicate effectively. For those of you who have gotten to know me through these series, you probably know that I take my family history pretty seriously. But I definitely find it very emotional. So I literally just ran and got my box of Kleenex for today's session. That should tell you something. Obviously today, we're going to be doing our own kind of commemoration of the anniversary of D-Day. It's a big topic, guys. This is a really big topic. So hopefully everybody was able to at least watch some of the events yesterday in Normandy. I was quite moved by many of the speeches and the ceremonies that were there. See, I'm already starting to get emotional. Yeah. All right, so let's do our usual. Let's say hello to everybody before I get too far into this. I warned Ellie that this was gonna be tough. All right. Kim is with us in Yorkshire. Jillian's up in Edinburgh. Janet's in sunny North Wales. I'm glad it's sunny for you, Janet. One of my colleagues was saying it was not very nice and she was wearing a jumper today. I offered to trade with her because it's been quite hot in California and Colorado the last couple of days. Unseasonably hot, actually. Gina's with us in Victoria down in Suffolk. Ergo's out in Wolverhampton. It's good to have you with us on the YouTube side. Gina is here. Andrew, I already said Gina. Warm and dry in Lancashire today, 18C at present. Karen, of course, in London. Thank you for being with us. Of course, Daphne. Jean in Lancashire. All the windows are covered and the door's so quite locked in. Oh boy, Jean, that sounds like quite a day, actually. Heather is up in Scotland as well. Gordon is with us in Alberta. Daphne made a comment about other brands. I think you're referring to the Kleenex comment. Yeah, this is not a Kleenex brand, but we just call them Kleenex. Like you guys call vacuums Hoovers. What do you call them? Tissue? Maybe? Anyway, total distraction. Sorry about that. Rosie's with us and Diane. It has been a while, Diane. It's good to see you. It's good to have you back. She comments that she is usually working during this time. Ellen's here. Lynn is in British Columbia. Ellie, I did try to warn you. I swear I did. Maybe I forgot. Anyway, you have time. Go grab some. Let's see. Pickles is with us and Liam is watching. Thanks, Liam. And Jenny's with us down in Devon. Oh, Jenny, you might like this session. Tissue. Okay, you call them tissue. Got it. Cool. Thanks for that. All right. So, lots of people commenting on the Kleenex tissue thing. I actually really like learning vocabulary like that because it helps me communicate with my colleagues. Okay, so I'm going to spend most of the session today really just sharing stories. We're kind of going to deviate a little bit from our usual pattern and our usual routine. So don't expect a lot of Findmypastness this time. This is really going to be kind of a storytelling session. So we're going to invite you, of course, to share your stories, and that is, of course, this week's question of the week. So, what is your family connection to D-Day? And that could be anything, right? It could be that you have memories of, your parents telling you stories about sitting around the radio, or kind of hearing some kind of oral history, or I'll share mine, right? So my grandfather, this is one of my most prominent memories, actually. My grandfather desperately wanted to enlist. He thought it was his duty, and he felt very responsible to do that. By the time the war started, he was the eldest son. His elder brother had actually died in a tragic accident, and so he really saw it as his duty, as the eldest in his family. And the U.S. military wouldn't take him because he was a dairy farmer, and they needed him to stay and support the war effort by milking his cows. And according to my dad, he never got over that. He was never able to kind of get past that. In fact, a couple of his brothers served. One of them did not come home, and he always felt like he should have been over there. So that's my most prominent family connection to D-Day, I suppose, is just these memories we have of my grandfather, always, all the way till the day he died, thinking I should have been over there with my brothers and the GIs. So your D-Day story could be anything. We all have one because we all share this global event, and it's what I would consider recent history, and certainly recent memory. So even if you don't have kind of that very personal connection, I think it's important to acknowledge that every person in the world today can probably find some connection to those events, especially in the Western speaking world, right? In the Western world. Yeah. So anyway, that's the question of the week. Share your stories in the chat and talk to each other. Share resources. I'm going to share my screen, and we're gonna go through quite a lot. But I do want to put this one up. Victoria's saying we're just sensitive souls, or soppy, as her husband would say. We are. I think we are, and actually, I think that makes us better family historians. So let me get my screen share up and running. Every time you open PowerPoint, it messes up. I don't know if anybody knows that but me. But I feel like it never quite cooperates with me the way I want it to. So 2 seconds. Sorry about this. I tested it before I started, and it worked great, and now it's not working. This is not the way I wanted to start, to be honest. Let me try that. Okay, that's better. All right, we're almost there. Okay, so we are absolutely talking about D-Day stories this week. We are going to be taking a trip through the newspapers and kind of exploring all of the different things that you can learn. And you're right, Andrew, I have multiple screens and PowerPoint does get confused. The thing that bothers me is that PowerPoint gets confused every single time. I can open a slide deck and then open a second slide deck, and it still doesn't know what monitor I'm on. All right. We're going to be looking through a bunch of different stories. We're going to be looking at D-Day from a number of different angles. So we're going to start, of course, though, with a couple of little updates. This is kind of, I wasn't going to share this at the first slide, but there was just something about this article. This is just a little snippet of a much longer piece. It's a journalist who actually parachuted into the beaches with a unit. And this was what he published the day before. So on the 5th of, or sorry, he published it on the 7th of June, but he wrote it like the night before as they were waiting for the call to go. And he's saying, and he has this whole long, you can look it up, it's in the Newcastle Journal. He has this whole long story about the tension and what it's like kind of in the hours before they take off. And this piece really captured me because I think this really tells a story in and of itself, right? He says that he saw a sapper sergeant who was taken off the operation by the medical officer earlier that day in the morning because he was sick. And this man burst into tears because he was so prepared and couldn't go anymore. And I think that really says something. And I think it's it's a piece of D-Day that I don't know, I've certainly never thought about it that way. I've never thought about these military efforts as something that these men wanted to do, right? Like, and maybe it's different in the States, versus the rest of the world, I don't know, but, you guys tell me. I think there's a lot of when it comes to World War II, there's a lot of conversation about the draft and men kind of being called up to the draft, and there was certainly a huge waves of volunteers signing up for the forces, but there's a lot of conversation about the draft and how men were kind of forced to go. Um, and so this perspective of literally bursting into tears because he was no longer allowed to participate in the invasion, that is just, to me, that was just a remarkable thing to read. Like, that one sentence just caught me yesterday. I had to stop researching for a while because it was like, this is too much. So that does set the tone a little bit, I think, for the day. But what we really want to do is kind of explore newspapers, especially because the newspapers really tell such interesting stories, and it's not just about the battle itself or the battles. And the aftermath of the invasion, we really can look at this global event, this historical event from all sides. So I'll show you what I mean. Right, but let's talk really quickly about new records because we did do an update to our World War II Allies collection this week, and we want to make sure that you're all aware of that. Um, Also, I'm going to note that all the photographs you're seeing in the background are from the Find My Past photo collection. They are all D-Day photographs. There's almost 300. There's around 300 photo images in that one collection. So certainly take a look at those as well. These are some of the updates we've done to the World War II Allies collection from the British Army perspective. So I'm just letting that sit there and giving you guys a chance to read through that. If you look at this photo kind of in the background around where the word awards is, you can actually see the vessels like out in the ocean, and this is taken from the shore in England, and they are headed across the channel. So um, really interesting photograph to me. So then on top of that, we also added to the collection from a number of other standpoints as well. So we did an update to our Air Forces, our Commonwealth collections, and then the civilians casualty list as well, largely from the Blitz. I'm again just giving you a chance to read through these. A lot of these are updates to existing collections, and I just want to make you aware that we've done this update. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to go through any of the other new records or new newspapers. So please refer to the blog post if you're looking for kind of your usual Friday Live content. Ellie is shared the link just now in the chat. So please make sure that you take a look at that if you're interested in other new records for this week. Okay, so let's talk about D-Day. So if you've been watching long enough, you have heard me and seen me raise this particular record set before. This is one that we've actually had on the Find My Past website for quite a while, but I think it's worth bringing up again. It's such a special manuscript. It was digitized and transcribed in partnership with the Devon Family History Society, and I continue to be so grateful to that organization, even if it's just for this one manuscript, because this book tells quite a story. So this is the register from the American Red Cross Service Club. And essentially when the men went in to have a pint, when they were in this area in North Devon, they had to sign in for this book. Not all of them did, but most of them did. And every once in a while, I kind of look back at this and pull up a page. So this is actually one of the pages from Washington State. They're organized by state. And I grew up in Washington. So when I was reading through this earlier this week, I was reading through the locations and just thinking about all these places that I know, right? I went to school. Oops, I pushed the button too fast. I went to college in Spokane or outside of Spokane. I grew up near a lot of these places, right? I know exactly what Wenatchee looks like. And of course, Tacoma, my aunt and uncle lived in Tacoma, my cousins. And there's all these locations in here that I have absolute memories of: Puyallup and Sequim and Tacoma and Kent and Everett. My husband's grandmother lived in Everett for a long time. Kelso, all of these locations, Port Angeles, every single one I can think of. I know exactly where they are, and I have a mental memory, right, of growing up in this area. So The thing that struck me about this register, though, today or this week, I guess, was the dates in the margin, right? You can see those three guys that kind of enter the club on June 3rd, June 4th, and then it goes back, I think it says 2nd, and then it skips to 19th July. And if you look through all the other states, you kind of see that big gap there. And I think that's, you know, that's a pretty remarkable piece of history right then in there of itself that this there's just that giant gap, right? And that gap tells a story. So just to give the background a little bit, so this service club was established at the Assault Training Center in North Devon, which was established in 1942, and it was set up as a center to develop and practice the amphibious assault exercises as they prepared for D-Day, right, at Normandy. They practiced on the beaches in Devon, and eventually they set up a service club by the Red Cross. It was set up in October of 1943 at a place called the Bungalow Cafe. It's now known as the Red Barn. It's still there. And this is the visitor's book, which recorded the individual's name, the date of their signing, sometimes the service number, location, hometown, state. Sometimes they have little funny drawings in the margin. They did all sorts of things on this register, but this one was, I don't know, to me this book is quite special, and I feel absolutely, as part of the Find My Past team, I feel absolutely honored that we have it on our site. But here's the thing. So I have never gone past the book, but this week I did, and I actually realized that there's quite a bit more to this story, right? Of course. So the first thing I found with this was this news clipping where one of the colonels from the American forces that was running these training camps wrote a letter of thanks to the people who set up the club. That club, the club that the book is for, the Red Cross Club, saying thank you for doing that and running such a fantastic establishment for our boys. And I was like, wow, that's like intense. And his name is in the register. And then the other thing I didn't realize is that there's actually a memorial in that community that was put up by the United States Army to the people of North Devon, basically saying thank you for sacrificing your land, your houses, your farms, so that we could have these training sessions, so that we could set up this whole camp, and prepare for this, globally so important event. And he actually, the memorial actually states a number of different villages and the area, so you can see all of that. If I'm ever in Devon, this is top of my list. I would love to go see that memorial. So the newspapers also tell us an incredible story about this training camp, right? So this is a page from Illustrated London News. The whole page is to the side, and then I've clipped out a couple of the images. So these are pictures of American soldiers training for the invasion, and of course their names are probably also in that register. Unfortunately, the newspaper didn't actually put any names in their page of images. It's a bit of a shame. But you can see how all of this training takes place and the intensity of what they were doing, right, for the months of preparation to the invasion. You also get a look from the perspective of the villagers, right? They evacuated the area for these mock battles. And then in the process of after the invasion, right? This clipping is from July of 1944. You see them trying to start to rebuild, and what do they restore first? Because everything's been destroyed by these mock battles, and it's just an incredible story. I think, it's one thing to look at a historical manuscript like that and go, wow, that's really powerful. It's a completely different thing to actually look at it from a bigger view, a broader perspective, and say what else was going on, because it certainly just wasn't US servicemen that were impacted. It was all of these people who lived in this area, and made all of these sacrifices. It's important to remember the big picture. And it's also, I think, important to remember that this invasion, although we refer to it as D-Day, the one day in June of 1944. But really, this was months in the planning, and then the aftermath lasted for quite a long time as well. So I don't know. I don't think I'll ever look at D-Day the same again, to be honest. We can also see from the newspapers, and as we start to look at that big perspective of this whole story, we can see a number of different angles. So this clipping, which I actually just found this morning and kind of tossed in, it's a report that is republished. So they have this German news agency, of course, right? And so they are copying a report from the German news agency talking about the impending assault, right? The impending invasion. Um, and the impression of kind of this reporter in Germany saying, we're ready, we're well prepared, and the longer they take, the Allies take, the longer they show their intention of where they're going to cross, and all of these kind of statements about, even Eisenhower's quoted in here. That D-Day is imminent, and we shall see. Germany can't wait. Um, eh, we can really study a period of time like this, or an event like this with this international importance, from every angle we can think of. And that's what I would encourage you to do, really. A lot of us, I think, if we have a military ancestor, we tend to focus on the unit, his activities in the war, but there's so much more to it than that, right? So a colleague a couple days ago said something about how she's always interested in logistics, and that really got me thinking too about, like, and her comment was, how did they feed all these guys once they got over there? And in the aftermath of the invasion, how did they actually get the food to the beaches, to actually keep them going? And that really made me start to think as well. Like, there's just so many different angles that we could take here. So well, actually, I think it was Ellie. I think I'm going to give Ellie credit for this one. She shared this first article about NAFI, NAFA. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. This abbreviation for the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes. She clipped this article, the first one with the little illustration. And that I was immediately like, oh, right. I understand what that is, right? The US has a very similar organization. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But I used to go to the commissary when I was a kid because I'm a Navy brat, and rhymes with taffy. Oh, thank you, Andrew. That's great. Taffy, naffy, naffy, right? So, anyway, very, very familiar with this particular concept, right, of supporting the troops through institutes like this or organizations like this. And so that got me thinking too about, the question of logistics and, like, how did it all work? And then I found this clipping about the first NAFI girls in France. I think I got it right. Um, and they're saying, the advanced party of EFI, which is NAFI overseas, which I didn't look it up. I don't know what EFI stands for. Maybe someone can tell us in the chat. The first British service girls to disembark in France only 7 weeks after the Allied invasion. So you have this establishment that helps support the armed forces. Okay, I get that. I understand that. There's another article, and I think I included it in here somewhere, but it talks about how they were willing to kind of put themselves into these situations where they were isolated. They weren't allowed to leave their base, because they were supporting these training regiments. Yeah, it's just this story just. I'll probably say this a million times. There's so many different ways you can look at these events and understand the story as it progresses, over the course of the months and months that it took to prepare for the actual event of D-Day. Of course, there's politics involved. Of course there is, right? So we took a clipping of the king, kind of doing his inspection of the fleet and sending, his wish of Godspeed, for those taking part in the assault. And then a snippet from another larger article saying, quoting Mr. Churchill, and saying, you can almost hear the MPs breathing as they listened to Churchill's speech, reading the announcement that the invasion had been started in bold letters in the paper, right? So this is the article is the perspective from the MPs, looking at the invasion and especially on the day of, right? I think this one was published on the 6th or the 7th of June. And Gordon says EFI's Expeditionary Force Institute. Thank you, Gordon. As you can tell, I am not well versed in the support systems of the UK military in World War II. That's not something I've spent a lot of time with, to be honest. All right, so D-Day. So we have all of this preparation and this training, and it leads up to these remarkable events that, of course, we are all well versed in at this point, very familiar with. Many of us could rattle off the names of the beaches, and if your ancestor served, you probably can do that. You can probably say, I know exactly where my grandfather was, my great grandfather was, and what beach he landed at. Um, there are some really remarkable images coming out of World War II, of course. And I have a particular interest in that, I suppose, because my dad was a naval photographer, and I have a lot of aerial photography like this, but from the Vietnam period. And then and the Cold War and the aftermath of Vietnam. Um, so over my lifetime, I have seen a lot of aerial photography of military activities, because he has quite a collection, and I've now inherited that. Um, so this image, of course, is particularly striking. You can see the vessels, you can see the landing craft, you can see the men on the beach, like all of the things, right? You see just a giant cluster down kind of in the corner. It's a really remarkable photo. It's widely available. It's certainly not, something no one's ever seen before, but it just still, I think it's still worth thinking about what they did, right? The actual activity that they were assigned to do that day. Um, through the newspaper collection, through digitized newspapers, no matter where you get them, you're going to find a huge amount of content, of course, telling the story of the preparation and the invasion itself and the aftermath. And that's what we're really trying to do today is kind of take you on the story of that whole event. You're going to see a lot of information about allies and the allied troops. So you'll see a lot of articles about the American Army, the Canadian Expeditionary Forces, the people fighting all over the world. You'll see a lot of articles about India and Australia, New Zealand, really anybody involved in the Allied powers, right? Lots of discussion about Russia, of course, and lots of imagery. This is a period in which photography is really showcased, and yet they are still also using drawings and sketches like this one. So yeah, there's just so much to think about. And again, looking at this event from just every possible angle that you can think of. If you're interested in military history and the battle itself, the battles, I should say, you should, definitely be looking at this. Now, Ellie just shared in the chat a link to the our D-Day collection that we've curated on Findmypast in our newspaper. So she kind of beat me to it, but she also reminded me that I should say this. So every article that I'm sharing here is available in that collection. So if you follow the link, you can see all of these. So if there's something that catches your attention, you can see everything that I'm going to talk about today and more. There are articles in there that I have not included. Those include things like carrier pigeons taking messages across. I think there's an article about a cat getting lost on the beach, and they actually he's the unit's mascot for a British unit, and he gets reported as missing in action, and hopefully he finds his life, like, and does well in France. I think that's what the article kind of implies, is that we hope he found his cat family in France. So there's also a lot in that collection, that curated collection of newspaper content that we are not sharing on the screen, but you'll find all sorts of information in that collection. So thanks, Ellie, for that link. It is in the chat if anybody wants it. There are a number of components, and again, I haven't even thought about some of these things, even though this is kind of the stuff I really enjoy doing. I haven't spent a lot of time on D-Day and my ancestors' involvement. I certainly haven't spent a lot of time on the British perspective of D-Day. It just hasn't been something that's been in my research libraries yet. But understanding the impact of things like the church and their sense of responsibility, right? So what you're seeing in the background is a minister a couple of days after the battle actually holding a service on one of the ships. But the article talks about how Church of England ministers and leaders have a responsibility to their communities and to their congregation. And they're talking about how they should open their parishes for the whole day and welcome in the community for prayer and for solace and for comfort, and how the leaders of the Church of England should really be making this kind of something that they do for the population, for the national population. So yeah, so think again, we think about the soldiers a lot. and the sailors, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what it was to sit through the battle at your kitchen table. I just kind of I had this image last night of a family kind of sitting around waiting for news of their son, their brother, their loved, their boyfriend, fiance, husband, nephew, cousin, whatever that relationship. Um, and just drinking copious amounts of tea and and trying to comfort themselves and not talk about it, but talk about it. But it would be such a very long day for everybody, right? It would have been such a long day for everybody who knew that it was happening. I just, yeah. All right. You'll find some very interesting tidbits. I did search to see if there were any women involved. This article came up first. I didn't go any further than this, to be honest. I don't know if this is really accurate, but this paper was reporting that the only woman involved in the actual invasion fleet itself was a Polish woman who was on board one of the Polish ships, and she was their cook. And they talk about how she's not much of a talker. She probably, English is probably not her first language. She's a chain smoker. The vessel almost capsized. She tells, some great stories, but she basically is like irritated that the Germans disrupt her meal plan, which, I mean, yeah. And she is a powerful woman as far as I'm concerned. I can't, like, wow, can you imagine just trying to like sit there and cook a meal in the mess? Um, and and just be like annoyed because your ship kid's getting bombed and stuff. Wow. Yeah. So there was at least one woman there as a Polish cook. Um, then you start to see, of course, the headlines come out of the aftermath, right? So this one is from June 6th. It's a special edition of the Evening News from Portsmouth. So British and Canadian secure beachheads at 2 points, right? You're starting to get a lot of detail, and you're starting to really get a lot of information as the hours go by, right? The reports are coming in, they're getting more and more detailed. They're learning more about what's happening, and then the photographs obviously start coming in as well and reaching the newspapers in the UK. 8th of June, it's announced that allies have cleared all the beaches of enemy forces, and essentially they're saying at this point the invasion itself, the launch of the invasion on D-Day, has been successful. I also really liked the advertisement over on the side, so I left that in for you guys. Very very trendy looking woman dressed in that outfit for £6. Yeah. So the story just continues to be told, and every newspaper takes a slightly different angle. So if you're interested in, say, for example, the 8th of June events, you want to make sure you're looking at a huge range of newspapers because they're all telling a slightly different story in terms of what angle they take to make their paper stand out. I loved this piece too. This is again just a little snippet in a much larger article, but it talking about communication inside the army itself. So they're saying that British soldiers in Italy are being kept fully informed of the progress on the Normandy front. And they're using these, mobile radio stations which transmit programs for 11 hours every day. And again, this is just one little tiny little piece in a much larger article, but this is the stuff that I felt like, for me at least, was really the most fascinating because, again, I never would have thought about how did we get the news to the rest of the parts of the armies, the allied forces that were elsewhere in the world that didn't participate in the actual landing at Normandy, right? And Ellie just commenting, her grandfather was with the 8th Army in Italy at this time. So, Ellie, now you have a D-Day story to kind of look at and tell and try and understand how your grandfather in Italy experienced this very significant invasion. And then, of course, how did the folks in France learn about what was happening elsewhere, right? Activity in Italy was quite a lot, right? There's a lot of activity in 1944, of course. D-Day is not the only thing that happened, um, uh, of course, in that year. And in the background, the image is a young man selling copies of the paper on the 6th of June. And I want to say this is in Manchester, but we can look it up if we need to. And he had to ration how many copies he was selling to people because everybody wanted a copy. And of course, and look at their faces, right? Everybody is grinning and the thumbs up all over the place. There's a soldier in the background. their faces, I think, say so much about how they were, about how the country was feeling that day, right? It was such a significant turn in the war. Gosh, I mean, and after the blitz that everybody had gone through, and all of the suffering and all of the struggle and all of the sacrifice from everybody across really the Western world, the Allied forces, uh, look at their faces. I'm gonna get emotional soon. Okay. Then, in the days, of course, in the aftermath of the invasion, another great aerial shot there in the background. But in the aftermath, you start getting the stories that are coming in, right? So, um, a Captain Leslie, who was part of the invasion, starts touring, and doing a lecture series, about the events, and then of course we start getting mentioned in dispatches, and much more personal stories. And this is where I think it's really possible for you to discover individual people in the newspaper content. This one's from Ireland, but I'm going to share a couple of more with you. Just to give big picture, though, this is what they were saying in the first couple of days. This article is from Edinburgh on the 28th of June, where they're reporting 40,000 Allied casualties. And remember, a casualty could be wounded or killed. Um, um, and their headline is 40,000 casualties, and then more than 5,000 British, Canadian, American soldiers for the Allied Expeditionary Force were killed during the first 15 days of the invasion in Normandy. So, I mean, we all know that this was an incredibly important event. We all know that um, that it was big, right? And there was a lot of struggle, and there was a lot of suffering, and there was a lot of loss. But seeing it in numbers, I think, always kind of helps put it into perspective, and kind of bring it back to reality a little bit. Um, so you have this, and then newspapers start to really tell the stories of the boys who didn't die, and who managed to come home. So we get full pages of experiences from D-Day, men who were injured. This particular paper, focusing, of course, on their local community, right? This is a York paper. So talking about going to the hospital and interviewing servicemen from York. And they tell all about their stories, and these phenomenal pictures, right? These two gentlemen in the photograph, I couldn't actually find them in the article. I don't think they were talked about, but they have this wonderful photograph of them, wounded men from Normandy, in a Wakefield hospital, and names them as James Romney, of Hellifield, and Leslie Jackson of Bingley. I think I said that right. Um, I- that's an incredible find. Right? That's an incredible story to tell. And of course, the newspapers were telling these stories because the newspapers are full of all the details, and the operation, and the military engagement, and the politics, and everything that goes into this. But they're also humans, right? And just like today, they love a good human story. Um, so when we were looking at, some of the collections, and trying to tell stories for this event, we stumbled across this one. Um, and a couple others quite like this. So this is the Gloucestershire Echo. It talks about a dead son who may be a survivor, and and to me, this is kind of one of the messages I wanted to get across today. It really starts to portray the chaos of what happened, right? If you think about all of those thousands of people hitting the beaches kind of all at once, and then thinking that at some point that day they were supposed to reunite and come to a point and find each other. Um, and then their leaders, their captains, so they're, the authority figures in the army, um, um, have to then at some point report up the chain who made it and who didn't. And there was so much chaos that we actually found a number of these events where someone is reported as killed in action after the invasion, but then, oh, we're not actually sure. And when I read this, I cannot imagine being one of these parents, right? I have a daughter. Many of you know that. I cannot imagine getting a report that she had been killed, and then a couple of days later getting another telegram saying, "Ooh, maybe not, but we're not totally sure. Stay tuned because we're not really sure what happened with your child." Like, that is mind-blowing and tragic and sad, and the emotion, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So you're in a grieving period, but then you're suddenly full of hope, like, "Oh, holy cow." Um And I'm gonna pause there because I wanna share Daphne's comment just now, because you're right, Daphne. Um, can I get my mouse to cooperate? There we go. Daphne says, let's not forget soldiers like my father who were behind enemy lines gathering intel that enabled these landings. They're hardly ever spoken about. Daphne, you're right. So let's acknowledge them as a community right now. There were a lot of men who sacrificed themselves and women. Um, um, I- Thank you for that, Daphne, very much. I didn't include any newspaper clippings about that, to be honest. I should have. But yeah, I don't know. It just didn't make it on the slides, I guess. All right. There was a lot of people involved, right? A lot of people. Okay. So you have this family connection and these family stories. Um, you're going to obviously get a lot of reports about injuries, and almost every time it's an interview with a soldier or a sailor, reporting back what they saw, what they experienced, and then of course they're in some kind of a recovery or hospital or um, um, the quote at the bottom of this one. This article goes on for quite a while. It did not fit on the screen, but he says, where I clipped it off, it says the children were very pleased, especially when we share our chocolate with them out of their rations, right? And yeah, so there's a lot of personal moments happening across the newspaper collection that are available for us to read about and discover. And again, let's say your ancestor isn't one of these people that's specifically named in the paper. You can research their unit, and soldiers from their unit that maybe did come back and share these observations and these experiences. So you kind of have to imagine that a lot of them were sharing a very similar story. Not necessarily always, of course, but it comes with a big caveat. But worth looking for. Okay. Um, there were a number of these types of articles as well. Again, another kind of man who was wounded and who was able to come home on leave for a little while. And the article, it was quite long. It talked quite a lot about they interviewed him quite a lot. It sounds like he was a Marine. His name was Jack Rhodes, the Royal Marine Commandos. And it talks about his parents and his family. And then on the side, like at the very end, they talk about the family service record. So his father served in World War One. His mother also served as a nurse in World War One. He has two sisters engaged in aircraft production, two brothers. One's a corporal in the Army Cadets, and the other is in the Boy Scouts, so clearly much younger than him. His fiance is also working on munitions. Um, the I mean, a whole family, right? And this was not unusual, of course. This um, would have been very average, I think, and expected. And then they say that he went to the cinema, the picture house, and he was astonished to see the very beach on which he had been fighting shown in the newsreels. That's another thing I can't really put myself into. I can't really imagine being someone who was home on leave and then seeing that scene pop up again um, in front of me on a cinema at the cinema. That would be intense. All right. Here's one of the most interesting stories I think that we were able to pull across, and this again kind of displays some of the chaos of the day. So this is a story about a Mrs. Ruff who is in Fleetwood, or near Fleetwood actually, in Lancashire, and she gets a call. She gets married, and then a month later, her brand new husband goes off to serve, and then she gets a call and says. That and has officially been told by the War Office that he'd been killed in Normandy. So they were only married for a month, and she gets this notification that he had been killed. So she files as a widow. She starts to receive a widow's pension. She continues to work. She's grieving. She's kind of going through her life, and they have a memorial service for this man. Um, and in fact, here he is, reported as killed in action. He's towards the bottom of the screen there. Um, uh, it's the first listing of Ruff, so Private E.G. Ruff in the Parachute Regiment. And you see his date of casualty, June 6, 44. Killed in action, right, in the Expeditionary Forces. So here's the memorial service. And as you can see from the headline, there's a memorial service, but he's alive. So 3 months after the landing at D-Day, she actually gets another phone call. And it is him saying, Yeah, I'm actually still alive. And several articles cover this. Some have a bit more detail. Um, and he actually reports that he was not killed in action. He was taken as a prisoner of war. He escapes as a POW, and then he fights with some of the French, and then he eventually finds his way back to the British forces and kind of reports in, right? And then he gets a month of leave and he goes home, and they go on holiday. In the military records, you can actually see the error being corrected, right? So the entry that's on the screen in front of you is saying, delete the above entry listed in error. He's not actually killed in action. Um, and again, kind of speaks to the chaos of the situation, right, that they were experiencing. Um, he was pretty easy to track, right? We know his name, E.G. Ruff. So when I started to look for this family, I pretty quickly came up with the family in the 1921 census, the 1939 register, although he was already in, I don't think he was listed on 39. He's already in the surface. The one that I had difficulty with actually was his wife. I was trying to figure out who she was because in every article she is just listed as Mrs. Ruff. And it was not until I accumulated several articles that I was able to kind of piece this together. In fact, this one, we even get a photograph of the happy couple, which is fantastic. And I'm so happy that he came back alive. But again, what an intense thing to experience, knowing, for 3 months thinking my husband is dead, right? I only had a month with him, um, and and then he's not dead. So eventually, the articles give me enough information that I was able to build out the tree a little bit, and realize that her name was Nora Croft. She's the daughter of Henry and Edith. One of the articles mentioned her sister Mabel, and that was really the clue that I needed to be able to put her with the right Croft family. They end up having two children, Ivan and Stephanie. Those are the only ones that were in the GRO anyway. I didn't go any further because their children could still be alive, and I just like respecting that privacy. But what an interesting kind of way to explore the history of D-Day through this one man's experience, where he's killed in action, he's reported as killed in action, and then he actually ends up as a POW, and then he fights with the French, and then he comes home, and there's this incredible reunion, and then he goes on and you know lives a great life. He actually goes into golf. What and Pickles, you just said it exactly right. What I'm trying to express, what a roller coaster of emotions that must have been. It's just absolutely incredible. Okay, here I am. All right. There's more of these. There's so many of these. I'm gonna try and get in as many as I can. So this one was really great, and the newspaper is curved like that because it's bound in a book, and it's hard for us to scan a little bit sometimes. But you get this idea of one of these stories. So this is a young man from Derbyshire. I almost said Derby. I did not. Derbyshire, Private Tucker, and he's home and he's wounded. Both legs are wounded, and he's in hospital. And his parents come to visit him, and they are staying with this woman, Mrs. L. Clements, who is local. And he shows her a photograph of a friend that is from the area. And he says, I would really like to try and find his family so that I can talk to them. This friend actually helped move me when I was wounded, right? He actually helped carry the stretcher. And all he knew is that the last name that they were looking for was Smith. And we all know how easy that must have been. And that his father worked for Rolls-Royce. So he hands over this photograph, and she goes to the newspaper and she says, I'm going to try and help you trace this family and try and find them. And then the very next day, and at the top of the article, it actually says within an hour of the photograph and the story being published, um, the young soldier is identified. Um, and the pal that the photograph is of is identified. So the soldier that they're looking for, his sister is in town, and she immediately comes to the hospital after seeing the newspaper report, and sits with this Private Tucker, and they exchange stories and talk about her brother. And then it also goes on to say that the father who and the parent and the mother are planning on visiting him in the hospital as well, so that they can hear these stories about their son, right? And their service and their friendship. What an incredible thing, right? What an incredible thing to be a parent and have a son at war, and then have this man suddenly kind of pop up and go, I want to talk to you because I know your son and we have shared experiences. That's yeah. Okay. There's also all sorts of other angles, right? So in this clipping about the story of the new invasion, where they're actually talking about how much war correspondents wrote about Invasion Day in the south of France, right? So the average length of a novel, a shared 78,516 words on from war correspondents. The Radio Corporation of America carried 44,000, and the British Cable and Wireless Service, did 33.7 thousand. The average delay on the American service was 52 minutes. The British was 4 hours 45 minutes, and the longest delay on any one message was 5 hours 19 minutes and 10 hours 35 minutes by cable and wireless. Those little stats about how they were communicating and how the media was working in this world and in this environment, that I was like, that's logistic heaven. Like if you're a media historian, or if you're interested in the media industry, or if you're interested in technology or development and how things changed over the course of the war years, that's your jam. Like that's the kind of information you're looking for. And then just next to that, there was this piece about where's the beer, and I couldn't resist that, of course. And they're talking about how more is being brewed, but there's always this general shortage. And they give three reasons, and they don't name the person or the brewery who actually supplies this information, but they say a world famous brewery identifies more women drinkers, more home based allied troops, and I'm going to particularly Americans. And then the pre war spirit drinkers have converted to beer. So the beer output has probably increased on the average by 25%, but the number of beer drinkers has increased by as much as 200%. Now, again, for those of you who have watched any kind of length of time, you probably remember that my husband works for a brewery, and so the beer industry is kind of a theme in our household. And this was just like a really fascinating discussion over dinner last night, going, like this, the immediate impact of commerce and trade and production of goods that something like a war would have, right? And this was printed in June of 1944. Okay, let's get to our last major story. And we're almost out of time, but I'm probably going to just see it through. And if you want to hang on longer than the official hour, please do so. But of course, we couldn't not talk about some of the names and the men who were kind of first on the scene, if you will. And some of the names that maybe over the course of your own educational life you've heard of. So the first three men accredited to land as part of the invasion were Captains Tate and Midwood, and then a Lieutenant de la Tour. I think I'm pronouncing that right. They touched French soil between 10 and 20 minutes past midnight, part of the 22nd Independent Parachute Company. And their job, along with all of their fellow parachuters, was to lay out lights, and then for the drop zones, and then these I forgot what they're called. I had it in my notes. There was a special beacon is the word I'm looking for, that had to be set off just 15 minutes before the next unit came in, and there was a very small window on purpose. That 15-minute was very intentional, so that the Germans couldn't intercept that information. That was the theory. So their job was to land on the beaches, face any opposition that was in front of them, get the lights set up, and set these beacons, and then reconvene at a designated place. So we decided to take a look at these three men and see what we can learn, and if we could add to their story at all. Because of course they've been talked about a great deal. If you go to the 50th anniversary newspapers, you'll find them all over the place, right? There's all sorts of information about them, but we wanted to see what else we could dig up. So the first thing I noticed is that on the killed in action report, two of them are listed almost side by side, right? They're just a couple of lines away from each other. Both Captain Tate and then Lieutenant de la Tour both lost their lives as a result of their invasion activities. Captain Tate, died from injuries on the 9th, and de la Tour died on the 19th, is his official killed in action report. We were able to find that Captain Tate had actually just gotten married a couple of years before. He got married in 1939. We found a photograph of him and his lovely bride from their wedding day in the papers. And my passenger list is all blurry. I'm sorry about that, but that is a passenger list. They honeymooned in the United States, and they were actually in the U.S. when the war was officially declared. And so they cut their trip early and went back home so that he could enlist. Um, so then he of course jumps on D-Day. De La Tour also shows kind of that green record at the top. It's not originally green, but I made it green so it would stand out to you. um, was originally listed as just a casualty, as injured, and then they did another correction report to say that his report should officially say died of wounds. um, so they had to make that correction again, kind of demonstrating the chaos of what that day was like. There's a newspaper clipping in one of the entertainment titles that actually identifies him as Bobby de la Tour, which is what he was known as. And they believe he was the first actor to land in France. So not only was he one of the first three, he was the first actor. And they talk about how before the war, he was gaining quite a reputation for himself as an actor. Um, and his death is a loss to the theater. His dad also served with the Canadian Expeditionary Forces in World War I, and you're looking at a portion of his father's military record as well. His father's name was Percival. Credited with being the very first man to land in France was Lieutenant Midwood, and when we worked on him, we found him pretty quickly in the 1939 register, which you're seeing in the background there. He was a police constable, but already in 39 he was listed as volunteering with the RA Reserves, so the Royal Air Force Reserve. And then there was quite a lot about him in at the 50th anniversary, which is where that snippet article is taken from. And it talks about him being the first man in France, that he came from this particular area and he married a girl from the same town, and she served with the Fannies. I looked for more about her. I was kind of intrigued at that idea, but unfortunately was unable to find anything else about her. But a couple, and Midwood was the only one of the three to survive the landing, and then again the subsequent injuries. So please read about the three of them. And do a little bit of digging on your own, see if you can come up with anything more than we did. Didn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but certainly a story worth telling. Okay. I haven't gone through any of your questions of the week, but I do want to share a couple of things. So we mentioned the collection that we have put together for Operation Overlord D-Day. On Findmypast as part of the newspaper collection. You can access this. Ellie did share the link a little while ago, so please take a look. And again, all the articles that I've shared are in there, and then a whole lot more actually. And we would encourage you to kind of pursue your own interests in terms of your family's connection to this incredible event over history, and create your own collection and share it. It's all doable on Findmypast. I just realized that my screenshot of that page has an arrow in it, so I was trying to move my mouse to see if I could get that little arrow to go away, but it's a screenshot. It doesn't move. So please read through these and find the angle and the perspective of the story that interests you the most. I would also encourage you to read through the British Newspaper Archive blog this week. Rose, as many of you know, is the author of that blog. And the newest title this week is the Hunts County News. And she has done a fabulous piece of work exploring some additional content on D-Day and the anniversary and the landings at Normandy. So please do make sure that you read through both the Findmypast blog and the British Newspaper Archive blog this week. They're both really well written and really well done. Many of you will know, of course, that you can kind of experience history through newspapers, and we would encourage you to do just that. The collections tool on the Findmypast newspaper collection really allow you to kind of save that material, and it sorts it in chronological order. So you really get the chance to kind of read through like preparation, the actual attack, the aftermath, the injuries, everything that we've worked through Um, Also, it is able for you to save, and you can really kind of experience the whole thing. Newspapers at this point, of course, are so heavily printed, right? And photographs are more accessible, and real time reports, what we would consider almost instantaneous news, is coming across the wire, and that is, I, you know, that's a perspective that you don't really get in terms of a military concept before World War II. World War One has the start of that, but you really see it come to life really in the newspapers on World War II. Also, of course, many of you know that Find My Past is free this weekend. Um, Celebrating the 80 years since D-Day, marking, celebrating is not the right word, honoring 80 years since D-Day. We want you to explore your stories. We want you to get in there and discover your connections to this incredible event. So you have until 10th June to do that for free on Find My Past. So please take advantage. For those of you who may or may not use Find My Past with a personal subscription. Okay, that is the end of my stories. I'm gonna try and get my mouse to cooperate. It's not tricky. Goodness gracious. I'm just trying to get this to go away. This is weird. What is going on? What's going on with my computer, you guys? All right. I don't know. We have a couple minutes. Well, actually, no, we're past the hour. But a couple of just quick comments. Campbell says, my uncle parachuted in on D-Day, have his name and date of birth, but nothing else. He survived the war. Now's your chance, Campbell. Take a look at what you can find. Hopefully you can find some information. We wish you the best of luck. And if you have any questions, just let us know. You can reach us at support@findmypast.com. And really, really pleased for you to reach out and get some help with that. An actor, Richard Todd, landed at Pegasus Bridge just after midnight. Susan tells us he later played as the lead in the Longest Day film. I didn't know that, actually. Lots of comments. Oh, Victoria, this is so well said. Amongst the horror of war, love is what carries people. I know. Oh. Okay, that was an intense one. I don't know how I really got that out, actually. And Victoria, again, how many wives, sisters, mothers must have gone through something similar as, a killed in action report and then suddenly a phone call? Can you imagine having your husband or your spouse of any kind, your partner, being told that they're dead, and then 3 months later picking up the phone and hearing that person's voice? My lights are the sun is shining in Colorado. It is so bright in my face. Kim saying that happened with her great grandfather, World War I. He didn't actually die till 29. So great grandma received the news in 1916 and had applied for a pension. It's intense. That's so intense. All right. There's a lot more comments. I would invite you to read through them and talk to each other and continue the conversation. But I think we're gonna call it there. Take some time with this. Spend the weekend kind of sitting in those memories, sitting in those stories. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself explore the history of this event in any way you want. Whatever particular angle is interesting to you, whether it's the carrier pigeons or the actual military history itself. Spend some time this weekend and remember. And we will see you back next week, back to our regular scheduled programming on Fridays Live. Thank you very much for joining me today, and taking a minute to acknowledge the importance of this event. I'll leave you, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.